There is a place on the North Cliff where the wind comes off the sea like it holds a grudge, and that is where I found the most powerful man in the realm on his knees in the dark, and understood, finally, that I had been wrong about every single thing. The rain had turned to ice. He was not weeping the way men weep. He was coming apart very quietly, the way stone does, from the inside, along a seam you cannot see until it gives. I had said no to this man 3 times. I had been so proud of my no, I had carried it around like a lantern. I knelt in the freezing mud beside a grave I did not yet have a name for, and I put my hand over his where it gripped the cold marker until his knuckles split, and for the first time I did not say no. I have wondered since whether that was also the moment I finally lost. The first time I said no, he laughed. It was a market morning 3 weeks before any of that, and I did not yet know there was a grave, or a sister, or a wolf that knew my garden better than I did. I keep bees on a hill my grandmother held by old Grant, above a village that needs me for candles and salves, and the dark amber honey the children claim cures everything, which it does not, but I let them believe it. The hill is mine. That is the most important thing to understand about me, and the thing that, it turned out, no one in the King's Keep could fit inside their heads. I owe no one. I answer to weather and bees and the turning year, and I had arranged my whole life around the luxury of never having to want anything a powerful man could give me. So when the Alpha King came down the market row in grey and iron, with his court trailing behind him like a held breath, and stopped at my table, and looked at my honey, instead of my face, I was the only person in the square not afraid. I had seen him before, of course. Everyone had. Alaric of the Iron Territories, who had not lost a war or an argument in living memory, whose composure was so complete it functioned as a kind of weather. The square went silent around him the way a forest goes silent around something with teeth. "This is the hill, honey," he said. "Not to me, to the air near me. It is. I did not add your grace." I noticed his second-in-command noticed that I did not. "I want the hill," the king said. "The keep will buy it. You will keep your bees and a wage and a roof, and you will not have to stand in markets. Name a price to my steward." It was, I understood, meant to be a kindness. It was the kind of kindness that ends with you owning nothing and being grateful. "No," I said. I have replayed the next second many times. The whole court froze, not at the refusal, I think, but at the simplicity of it, the way you would freeze if a cat told you no in plain words. And the King of the Iron Territories looked at me directly for the first time, and something crossed his face that he did not authorize, a flicker, gone before it finished, and then he laughed. One short, surprised breath of it, like a man who has stubbed his toe on furniture he owns. "No," he repeated, as though tasting a foreign coin. "It's my grandmother's hill," I said. "I'm not for sale, and neither is she." He left without buying the honey. His second-in-command, Osric I would learn, a broad grave man who wore worry like a second cloak, lingered half a heartbeat, and leaned in, and said under his breath, with something close to fear, no one tells him no. "Someone just did," I said, and went back to my bees. What I did not tell Osric, what I did not tell anyone, was that I already had a wolf. He had been coming to my hill for a year, a great silver beast, grey along the spine, who had simply appeared one evening at the edge of the bee garden and lain down among the hives, as though he had an appointment. The bees did not sting him. I have kept bees my whole life, and I have never seen them tolerate anything the way they tolerated him. They crawled over his paws like he was part of the hill. He let me pull burrs from his coat. He stole my sun hat twice and buried it badly. He brought me things, a hare, a smooth stone, once a sprig of sea holly from the cliffs I never walked, laid at my door, with the care of a creature who had carried it a long way in soft jaws. I called him the gentleman, because he was better mannered than most men I had served candles to, and because naming a thing properly means admitting you intend to keep it, and I was not ready to admit that about a wild wolf. I did not connect him to anything. Why would I? The wolf was mine, and the king was the king, and the two facts lived in separate rooms in my head, and that, I see now, was exactly the architecture the truth was hiding inside. The second offer came 8 days later, and by then I had been summoned to the keep. Not arrested, summoned, which at the keep is the same shape with better manners. The Hill's grant, it transpired, was irregular, a century-old scrap of paper that the council had decided to regularise, and the only person who could regularise it was the king. And the king wished to discuss it over a meal I had not asked for, in a hall I did not want to be in. The hall was the most beautiful thing I had ever resented. And there was a woman at the king's right hand, Lady Cassia, gold and cold and entirely composed, who had clearly arranged her whole life around a seat that I, a beekeeper with honey under her nails, was somehow disordering by merely existing in the room. The grant can be confirmed in perpetuity, the king said, when the plates were cleared. Made unbreakable, yours and your daughter's after you, beyond the reach of any council. A pause, weighed and set down like a stone on a scale. If you take a position here, keeper of the keep's stores, a name, a standing, security no market day can take from you. It was a better offer. It was in fact a genuinely good offer, and I understood the cost of it the way I understand weather coming. And if I say no? Then the grant goes back to the council, said Lady Cassia, gently, before he could answer, and councils do as councils do. I looked at the king. He had not said it. I noticed that he had let her say it, and that he did not like that she had. No, I told him. I'll take my chances with the council. I'd rather lose the hill standing on it than keep it on a leash. The hall made a sound. Osric, behind the throne, closed his eyes briefly, like a man watching a bridge wash out. And the king did not laugh this time. He went quiet, a specific total quiet, the quiet of a vast thing holding still, and he looked at me the way you look at a map that does not match the country you are standing in, and he said, "You truly do not want anything I have." "I want my hill," I said. "You keep trying to give me my hill with strings on it, and calling it a gift." Something moved behind his eyes, and did not finish moving. He let me go home. That night the gentleman was waiting in my bee garden, and he put his great head on my knee and sighed as though he had had the longer day, and I told him, the way I told him everything, that the king of the Iron Territories was the loneliest powerful man I had ever met, and did not have the first idea of it. The wolf looked at me for a long moment. Then he got up and walked to the cliff path and looked back, once, the way a creature does when it wants you to follow. I did not. I have thought about that a great deal since, about the night my own wolf tried to show me the grave, and I went inside instead and banked the fire. If you are wondering why a woman, with everything she needed, kept being dragged toward a man who frightened a whole court, and what was waiting at the top of that cliff path that I was not ready to see, stay with me. The third offer is coming. And the third offer is where I stopped being the one who understood the situation. Follow along, so you do not lose the thread. The third offer was not made in a hall. Lady Cassia saw to that, though she did not mean to. She made her move first. The council voted. On a morning I was not invited to revoke the grant entirely, and men came up my hill with a sealed order and instructions to count my hives as crown property. I stood in my own garden and watched a clerk put a tally mark against my grandmother's bees. And for the first time in my self-sufficient life, I felt the specific cold of having no one to call. So I walked to the keep on my own feet, with no summons, and I was not let in, and I stood at the gate like a petitioner until the king came out. He came out himself. That, I would later learn, had never happened. He came through his own gate into the mud with his court scrambling behind him, and he looked at me standing there with the revocation order crushed in my fist, and the composure that functioned as weather cracked clean across. "Who signed this?" he said. It was not a question to me. "Your counsel. While you were not looking." I held it up. "You said the grant was beyond their reach. You were wrong, or you lied, and I don't know which is worse." Marin, it was the first time he had used my name. He said it like it cost him something he could not spare. "Come inside." Out of the cold. Let me. Don't fix it with another offer. It is not an offer. And there, at his own gate, in front of his own court, and Lady Cassia's white face, and Osric's open horror, the proudest man in the realm did the thing his pride had been built specifically to make impossible. Stay, not as keeper of stores. Not on the council's terms, or mine. Stay at my side, as my equal, as the only person in this realm who has never once needed me, because I find I cannot stop thinking about the one woman who doesn't, and I am too tired to pretend that is about a hill. It was a proposal. The whole court understood it was a proposal, the Luna's seat, the thing Lady Cassia had ordered her life around, offered in a courtyard to a beekeeper with a revocation order in her fist. And I said no. A third time, calm, certain, the no I had carried like a lantern. "No," I said. "You can't ask me to stand beside you in the same breath your counsel steals my ground out from under me. You don't want a partner, your grace. You want the one thing in your kingdom that isn't yours. That's not love. That's appetite. And I've been hungry before. And I know the difference. I have never seen a silence land that hard on that many people. And the thing that crossed the king's face this time did not flicker and vanish like the first day, did not freeze into stillness like the second. It changed all the way through, slow and terrible and complete, like the tide turning in a single body. And what was left looking out at me was not a king at all, and not appetite, and not anything I had a name for. It was something that had been waiting a very long time to be seen, and had just been refused by the one person who almost had. He did not argue. That was what undid me later. He simply said, very low, "You're right that I don't ask. I never learnt how." And he turned and walked back through his gate, and Osric followed him with a backward look at me. That was not horror anymore, but something closer to grief. And Lady Cassia smiled. I should have gone home triumphant. I had said no to a king 3 times, and kept my spine. Instead, I stood in the mud with my chest aching in a way that had nothing to do with the cold, and I understood that I had just won an argument I did not actually want to win, and I did not know why. I found out 3 days later, and it ended the version of me that thought she had the situation in hand. I had a standing order, you see. For 2 years, a single jar of my plainest honey, not the dark amber the children loved, the pale early honey nobody asked for, had been bought every month by someone I never saw. Old coin, the heavy kind not minted in 30 years, left at the crossroads shrine below my hill, with a folded note that only ever said the same as always. I filled it without thinking. A customer is a customer. I had built a small private theory that it was some sentimental old widow, and left it there. That week, with my grant revoked, and my heart inexplicably bruised, I decided to find out who it was, because I needed, badly, to feel like I understood one single thing. So I left the jar and I waited in the gorse above the shrine in the cold until the moon came up. The gentleman came for it. My wolf. The silver wolf who slept in my bee garden. He came down the crossroads in the moonlight and took the jar of pale honey up in his soft, careful jaws, the way he carried everything precious. And he turned and went up the North Cliff path, the path he had tried to show me, and I followed him this time, all the way to the top, where the wind comes off the sea like a grudge. There was a grave there, old, well-tended, a low stone worn smooth, and the wolf set the jar down against it with a tenderness that stopped my breath, and lay down beside it in the wind, and changed. I had never seen a shift. I will not pretend it was beautiful. It was the most painful-looking thing I have ever witnessed, and the most private, and I should have looked away. I did not. The silver went out of the great body, and the man came up out of it, on his knees in the dark beside the grave. And it was the king. It was Alaric, and he gathered the small pale jar of my nobody honey to his chest, like it was the last warm thing in the world, and I heard him say a name to the stone. Halla, his sister, the stone said. Beloved. Dead, 9 years. I stood in the gorse with my hand over my mouth and felt every certainty I owned go out from under me at once. The wolf in my garden, the honey to a grave, the man who could not stop coming to my hill and did not know how to say why. He had not been collecting me. He had been coming to the one place on his earth where the grief let go of his throat. My hill, my bees, my grandmother's pale early honey that a little girl named Halla had loved before I was old enough to know either of them, and he had been doing it on 4 legs, because the man was not allowed to grieve, and the wolf did not care what the man was allowed. I had called it appetite. To his face. I had been so proud of my lantern. The next morning there was a different woman walking up the keep road, and she was done being amused. I did not feel wonder, I felt furious, at him, for hiding 9 years of grief inside a wolf and letting me mistake it for a king's vanity, at myself, for being so in love with my own independence that I had refused the only honest thing anyone had ever offered me. The softness I had carried up that hill curdled into something with an edge, and it has not gone back. I had spent my life making sure I never needed anyone. It had made me very good at not being needed, and I was starting to suspect those were the same skill. I did not go to forgive him. I went to fight, because something was about to be taken that he was too proud to defend out loud, and I had just realized I was the only one who could see it. Lady Cassia, you understand, had not been idle, with the king visibly unsteady, bewitched by a honey girl. The council whispered. She made her real move. She did not aim at me. She aimed at the grave. There was to be a choosing, a formal court rite. The king to confirm a Luna at last, and put the unseemly rumours to rest, and Cassia had the council behind her, and the date set before he could refuse it. And as the centrepiece of her case that Alaric was unfit to choose for himself, she meant to produce, before the whole court, the thing she had paid a clerk to dig up, that the king of the Iron Territories spent his nights as a wolf, carrying honey to his dead sister's grave like a madman, unmanned by a grief 9 years stale. She would break him open in public to prove he needed managing, and put her own hand on the crown while he was still bleeding. I learnt this from Osric, who came to my hill himself, this broad grave second in command, who had once warned me no one tells the king no. He stood in my bee garden where his king had slept 100 nights as a wolf, and he said he will let her do it. Do you understand? He will stand there and let her use Halla to gut him in front of his own court, because he believes he deserves it. He has believed for 9 years that he should have died on the cliff instead of her. He looked at me with no horror left at all. You are the only person who has ever told him no, and meant it for his sake. I am asking you to tell him one more thing. So I went to the choosing. The hall was full of every soul who had watched me refuse him 3 times, and Cassia stood gold and certain at the king's right hand with a sealed parchment in her grip, and Alaric sat the wolf throne with his composure back on like armour over a wound, ready to let her open him. The cold woman rose. She began to speak about fitness, about a king unmanned, about evidence the court must hear, and she lifted the parchment, and I watched Alaric not move, not defend himself, brace to take it. I did not let her finish. "I'll tell them," I said, and walked into the middle of the king's hall, uninvited, the way I had walked into everything in my life, and the whole court turned. "You want to read out where the king goes at night? I'll save you the parchment. He goes to his sister's grave. He brings her honey. My honey, the pale early kind a little girl liked before either of you were anything but children." I turned to the court, to the 100 faces that had thought me a beekeeper with ideas above her station. "You were told that's the behaviour of a man who needs managing. I keep bees. I'll tell you what it's actually the behaviour of. It's the behaviour of the only honest creature in this room." The hall had gone utterly silent. He has run your wars and held your borders, and never once let you see him grieve. Because you. I looked at Cassia, and I did not raise my voice, and I have been told since that it carried to the back wall like a struck bell would do exactly what you are doing right now. Use it. You didn't find a weakness, my lady. You found the one strong thing left in him, and you mistook it for a crack because you have never loved anything you couldn't spend. Cassia opened her mouth. Nothing came out. There is a particular silence that follows the truth said plainly by someone with nothing to lose, and the whole court was drowning in it, and she could not find the surface. And the king stood up off his throne. He came down the dais steps, past Cassia and her useless parchment, and he stopped in front of me, and the armour was simply gone. He did not put it back on, not in front of any of them. "You said it was appetite," he said, low, "only for me," though the silent hall heard every word. "You were the only person in 9 years to tell me no, and I let you, because you were the only person who ever saw me clearly enough that your no meant something. I should have shown you the grave the first night the wolf tried to. I was ashamed, not of her, of needing." His jaw worked. "You were right that I never learnt to ask. I'm asking now, in front of all of them, for nothing you have to give me. Only that you stop being somewhere I am not." That, it turns out, was the offer I had been waiting my whole proud life to refuse, and could not. The grant. I should tell you about the grant, because he did the thing that cost him. Before the court, before he had any yes from me at all, he tore Cassia's revocation in half and confirmed the hill to me and my daughters in perpetuity, free and unleashed, no string, no seat, no condition, and named it Crown-Protected Ground, which meant he had just given away the one piece of leverage that might have bought him my yes, in front of every advisor who had told him to keep it. He gave me the thing that made me free of him. Then he stood there, free of leverage, and waited. So I gave him my yes the only way it could be honest, owing him nothing, holding all my own ground, choosing him because I wanted to, and not because I had to, which is, I have come to think, the only kind of yes worth a damn. The storm came that night, the way grief does, when you finally stop arming against it. He went up the cliff in it, and I went after him, and that is the part you saw at the start. The most powerful man in the realm on his knees in the freezing dark, coming apart along the seam at last, and me kneeling in the mud with my hand over his, where he gripped the cold marker, until his knuckles split. The old grief did not go quietly. It came up harder than it had in 9 years, cold driving into my own bones, the wind trying to take us both off the cliff, blood on the stone from his hand and then from mine where I held it there. He tried to tell me to go where it was warm. I told him no, one last time, and that one I meant the other way around. And I stayed. And I was the steady thing while he broke. And the breaking did not kill him, because for the first time someone he could not buy and did not own had simply decided not to leave. When the kiss came, at the top of that cliff with the sea below and his sister's stone beside us, it was not a thing I will describe in any way I would have to be careful about. It was the moment the want stopped being hunger and turned into the thing hunger had only ever been pointing at. It was 9 years of held breath let go at once. Then the storm was just weather. And we were two cold people who had decided to be cold together, and we went down the hill. Lady Cassia did not stay for the wedding. The court that had watched her try to butcher a king with his own grief had a long memory, and no further use for her. She went north to relatives who wanted her even less, stripped of her seat and her standing. And the council that had voted my hill away found itself suddenly eager to agree with whatever the king said next. Osric stood up at the choosing that became a claiming and was the first to bend the knee, and later, in his cups, told me he had known the morning I refused the first offer that I would be the ruin of all his careful plans, and that it was the best thing that had happened to the Iron Territories in 9 years. I have never let him forget he once told me, "No one tells the king no." It is a year on as I tell you this, and the hill is still mine. Mine, the word the whole keep finally learned to say correctly. We split our nights between his stone halls and my grandmother's cottage, and the bees have decided the Alpha King is acceptable, which is more than they grant most people. The dark amber honey still goes to the village children, who think it cures everything. And on the first cold morning of every month, a jar of the pale early honey still goes up the north cliff to a low-worn stone, except now 2 people carry it, on 2 legs, in daylight, and we sit a while with Halla and the wind, and it is not a wound he visits in secret anymore. It is just his sister. He talks to her. He told her about me. I am told she would have laughed at the part where I said no 3 times, and I like to think she would have been on my side. I spent my whole life making certain I needed no one, and I was so good at it, I nearly walked past the one person who only ever wanted to be let in. I named a king's wolf the gentleman because I was not ready to admit I meant to keep him. Reader, I kept him. So here is what I genuinely cannot decide, a year warm and still turning it over, when I refused him that 3rd time in the mud at his own gate. Was I protecting myself, the way I told myself I was? Or was I punishing him for needing me when I had spent my whole life making sure no one would? Tell me below. I have argued both sides, and lost both times. And if you want to know what happened the first winter a beekeeper sat at the head of the Iron Court, and what his wolf did the day the council came back to apologise, comment the gentleman, and stay with me. There's more of this one. Where are you listening from tonight?
There was a knife in my hand and a man in my doorway, and behind me, in the dark of the only home my children had ever known, my son was asking whether the tall stranger would be staying for supper. I had spent 2 years making certain this exact man could never stand where he was standing. I had moved us 4 times. I had buried a name. I had let an entire kingdom go on believing the comfortable lie that I was dead, because dead women are not hunted, and a dead woman's children are left to grow up in peace. And he had found us anyway. He filled the whole doorway with the firelight at his back, and he did not look at the knife at all. He looked at me the way a man looks at a grave that has just spoken his name. He said the name I had buried. And I understood, 2 years too late, that the worst thing I had ever believed about him might not be true, and that I had built my children's entire lives on top of it. It started 2 years and 1 winter before that, on the night they told the king I was dead, and told me that he was the one who wanted me gone. My name is Elowyn, and I was 23 that winter, a woman grown by any pack's law, an omega of the Iron Territories, which in plain speech means I was born to the bottom of the world and raised never to forget it. Omegas do not become lunars. Omegas do not carry an Alpha King's heirs. Omegas, when they inconvenience the people who matter, do not generally go on living. I was carrying twins when they put me out the eastern gate in the snow. I will tell the rest of that night in its place. What you need to know first is the part that came after, the part nobody in that fortress ever imagined, because it did not occur to a single one of them that the Omega in the snow would simply refuse to die. I did not die. I walked. I walked 4 days through the deep wood with a dead name and a living weight under my ribs, until I came to a fall of rock and a hollow under it where the wind could not reach, and there, alone, with no fire I dared keep lit and no hands but my own, I brought 2 pups into the world on the coldest night of the year and dared the cold to take them from me. It did not. They were too stubborn. They came by it honestly. I named them myself, with no one to argue. The girl I called Ada, because she came first and she came furious, fists already swinging at a world that had not yet done anything to her but would. The boy I called Bram, because he came second and quiet and watchful and watched me, even then, like he had already worked out that I was all he had and meant to keep an eye on his investment. For 2 years, I was their whole world and they were mine, and I want to be honest with you about those 2 years, because the story everyone tells about them later is a sad one, and they are wrong. They were the best 2 years of my life. We lived in a cottage I half built and half stole back from the forest, a day past the last trapper's line, where no banner had ever flown and no taxman had ever walked. I learned which routes fed us and which killed us, mostly without dying of the difference. I set snares. I traded cured hides at a crossroads market 4 villages over, under a 4th name, with my hood up, for salt and thread, and the boots the twins grew out of faster than I could earn them. I cut my own hands to ribbons the first winter, and grew new skin over them, harder, that first winter's price. And every night, in a cottage that smelled of wood smoke and the particular animal warmth of 2 sleeping children, I told them their father was a great king far away who would have loved them if the world had been kind. And I let them believe the kind version, because they were small, and the truth was mine to carry, not theirs. That was the one lie I told them. I have thought a great deal since about how it turned out to be the truest thing I said in 2 years, and I did not even know it. Here is what I believed, on every one of those nights. I believed that King Halvar of the Iron Territories, the wolf who had looked at a still-room Omega across a crowded hall one autumn, and against all law and all sense, come back the next night, and the next, until the most powerful man in 3 territories was meeting a nobody in the dark of a winter garden and talking to her like she was the only real thing in his stone kingdom. I believed that man had stood by while his court threw me in the snow. I believed it because his own cousin had told me so, with his seal in her hand, on the night they did it. He thanks you for your discretion, Lady Sigrid had said, holding the king's own signet up where I could see it gleam, while 2 of her men held the gate open on the dark. He cannot have an Omega's byblow muddying a royal bloodline. He is to wed within the year, properly this time. He asks that you go quietly and that you understand he will not look for you. She had smiled then, and I have spent 2 years learning to hate that smile in the abstract before I understood what it was actually hiding. Do not make him hunt you, girl. You would not enjoy being found. So I went, and I made certain, with everything I had, that I would never be found. Not for my sake, for theirs. Because a king who would discard a mate would discard the proof of her, and I was not going to spend my children's lives waiting for the gate to open again on the dark. That was the foundation I built everything on. 2 years, 4 homes, a buried name, a whole life poured into 2 small stubborn people who deserved it. And the foundation was a lie. The man had never said one word of it. But I am getting ahead of myself, and the day it cracked started, like all the worst days, with something small. It started with a trapper. He came to our crossroads market in the 3rd autumn, a grey-water man working a new line, and he watched Bram fight Ada over a wooden toy a beat too long, with a frown I did not like, and then he was gone before I could decide whether to run. I told myself it was nothing. I had told myself a great many things were nothing over 2 years, and been right almost every time. I was wrong about this one, because the toy the children were fighting over was a small wolf, carved from apple wood, worn smooth and dark by 2 years of small hands. And it was carved in a style any man of the Iron Court would know on sight, because the king himself had made it, the winter we met, in the dark of that garden, turning it over and over in his big, careful hands and pretending he was not making it for anyone. I had taken it the night they put me out. The one thing I stole. I had told myself it was for the children, to have a piece of him. I had not let myself ask why I wanted a piece of a man I was teaching myself to hate. The trapper had seen a wolf-marked toy in the hands of 2 pups with the Iron King's own grey eyes, a day past the last line, and he was a poor man, and there was a price, and within the week the price had been paid, and the word had climbed all the way up the cold stone of the fortress to the high seat itself. I knew none of that yet. I knew only that 8 days later I came up the path from the snares at dusk and saw, through the trees, a column of the king's own warriors standing in my dooryard, and the king of the Iron Territories down on one knee in the mud in front of my open door, with my daughter's furious small fist gripped in one of his hands and my son's wooden wolf held in the other, looking at it like the world had ended and started over. I did not go to him. I want you to understand that I stood in the tree line, close enough to hear, with my heart trying to climb out of my throat. And I did not go to him. I watched the most feared wolf alive meet his children for the first time. I watched Ada, who had never feared anything, plant her feet in the mud and inform a king that this was her house and he had not been invited. I watched Bram go quiet and watchful at his knee, reach out one finger and touch the carved wolf in the giant stranger's hand, as if checking it was real. I watched King Halvar's whole iron face come apart, slowly, like ice going off a river in spring, and I watched him bow his head over my children's hands and stay there a long time, his shoulders moving, while 40 of his warriors looked anywhere but at their weeping king. He had found them happy, fed and safe, and laughing at him, and entirely unafraid because I had done that, alone, and there was not one mark on them that the world had ever been unkind. And I understood, watching him, that they were better off with him than running with me, that he could give them stone walls and an army and a name, and I could give them snares and a 4th alias and a mother always watching the tree line. I understood it the way you understand a wound, all at once, and then forever. So I did the hardest thing I have ever done, harder than the cold night under the rock. I left them there. I backed into the deep wood without a sound, the way 2 years had taught me, and I took nothing but the clothes I stood in, and I made sure, with false trails and a stolen boat and every trick of vanishing I had bought with 2 years of fear, that the king who had thrown me away would have his heirs, and would never, ever find the Omega who'd kept them. I gave him everything I had left to give. I gave him our children, and I asked for nothing, not even the truth, because I thought I already knew it. If you want to know how a woman walks away from her own children and what it took to do it, and whether she stayed walked away, because I will tell you now that I did not, and the reason why is the whole heart of this. Then stay close with me through this next part, and do not lose the thread, because everything I thought I knew was about to be turned over in the space of a single conversation in the dark. It was Gunnar who found me. The king's second, his sworn shield, a grey-bearded mountain of a wolf I had known by sight in my old life, and he found me 11 days later at a river ford 2 territories gone, which should have been impossible, and the fact that it was not impossible should have told me something. He did not draw on me. He sat down on a rock across the ford, an old man easing old knees, and he said, he has not slept since he found them. He sends the warriors out by day, and he walks the wood himself by night, on foot, like a tracker, calling a dead woman's name into the dark. The court thinks he has lost his mind. Gunnar looked at me across the water. I think he lost it 2 years ago, and is only now getting it back. Will you let me tell you a thing, Omega, that you have had wrong since the night you left? And he told me. There had been no order. There had never been an order. On the night Sigrid put me out the eastern gate with the king's stolen signet in her hand, King Halvar had been 3 days' ride north at a border parley, and he had come home to be told, by his grieving cousin, with tears in her eyes, that the Omega he had been seen with too often had taken fever in the night and died, and the child with her, and that she'd been buried already. Quick, the way you bury fever before it spread. He had torn the fortress apart looking for a grave that did not exist. He had not eaten for a week. He had nearly gone to war with Greywater over a rumour that they'd had a hand in it, and his cousin Sigrid, who wanted the throne for her own son, and could not have it while the king's wolf was fixed on a healthy omega, had stood at his shoulder through all of it and grieved with him, and steered him, and very nearly got him to wed her chosen bride, before the wood gave up its secret. 2 years. He had grieved me for 2 years. He had believed me dead. I had believed him a monster. And the same woman had told us both our lie, in the same week, with the same false grief, and walked away to wait for it to bear fruit. I sat down at that ford in the cold mud, and I felt something I had been carrying for 2 years go out of me all at once, and something far more dangerous come in to fill the space where it had been. For 2 years, I had been a woman in hiding. I had been careful, and quiet, and small, the way the bottom of the world teaches you to be. I had run, and called it protecting my children. I stopped running at that ford. I remember the exact moment my register changed, the moment caution turned over into something with teeth. I stood up out of the mud, and I heard my own voice come out flat and certain in a way the omega in the snow could never have managed, and I said, "Then she is still in that fortress, with my children, right now." "Yes," Gunnar said. "Then I have been running in the wrong direction for 11 days, I said. "Take me back. I am done being dead." We did not make it in time to do it quietly, which is its own kind of luck, because Sigrid was not a woman who waited. She had understood, the moment the twins came through the gate alive, that her 2-year lie was now 2 small witnesses growing up under the king's own roof, and that a mother who had hidden them so well was a mother who might walk back out of the wood at any hour with the truth in her mouth. So she moved. She moved the way she had moved before, quietly, in someone else's name. She put it about that the wood children were feral and uncanny, omega-born, and possibly not the king's at all, a danger to the bloodline, and she arranged for them to be taken from the fortress, for their safety, to a holding of hers in the hills, from which I have no doubt at all 2 small children would never have returned. I came through the eastern gate I had been thrown out of 2 years before, on my own feet this time, with the king's own second at my back, into a courtyard full of torchlight and shouting, on the exact evening her men were loading my children into a covered cart. What happened then happened fast, and I have had to build it since out of my own memory, and 100 others, because in the moment I saw only Ada. I saw my daughter, who had never feared anything, fighting a grown warrior with both furious fists, exactly as she had come into the world, and I crossed that courtyard without any plan in my head at all, except the oldest one there is, and I put myself between my children and the men with the king's cousin's coin in their pockets, and I said, into a courtyard gone suddenly silent, "Those are mine, put them down." The whole yard turned, and from the steps of the great hall, where he had come out at the noise, the king of the Iron Territory saw a dead woman standing in his torchlight with his children behind her, and for the second time in 2 years his iron face came apart. It was Sigrid who moved first. She was always going to be the one who moved first. She came down off the steps fast and smooth with a blade already out of her sleeve, because a lie 2 years deep does not surrender. It tries to close the only mouth that can speak it. And she came not for me, but for Ada, for the witness, the small one, the easy one. I did not think. I have never been more certain of anything in my life than I was of the next thing my body did. I stepped into it. I took my cousin by might's blade across my own arm, putting myself in front of my daughter, and I got both hands on Sigrid's wrist, and I held. And the old wound woke up. You should know that when an alpha's bond is severed, when an omega is cast out and the thread between them is cut by force, it does not heal clean. It leaves a cold place. For 2 years I had carried a frozen seam down the centre of me where King Halvar's bond had been torn out, and I had told myself it was grief and learned to live around it. But the king was 10 feet away now, and his wolf had scented me across the whole courtyard, and the severed bond felt him there and tried, all at once, to close. 2 years of severing reversing in a single instant, and the cold of it came up through me like a wave off a winter sea, driving the breath out of my lungs and the strength out of my legs while I held a murderer's wrist over my daughter's head. It would have been easy to let go. The cold wanted me to let go. The old severing wanted to stay severed. That is the nature of a wound. It fights to remain. I felt my own blood run hot down my arm, and my own fingers go white on Sigrid's wrist, and the whole frozen weight of 2 years trying to crush the air out of me. And I chose, with everything I had, to hold on through it. For Ada. For the thread that wanted to live. For the man across the yard I had spent 2 years hating by mistake. I held until Halvar reached us. He took Sigrid's arm out of my hands like a man plucking a reed. The blade went into the mud. And the cold broke. Not gently, but all at once, the severed seam in me finally finding the other end of itself, and the warmth flooding back so hard I nearly went down, and would have, except that the King of the Iron Territories had his arm around me by then, and was holding me up in front of his entire court without one particle of shame about it. "You're bleeding," he said. "Of all the things. 2 years, and the first thing he says to me is that I am bleeding." "You'd know," I said. "It's your cousin's knife." And then, because the cold was gone and the warmth was back and I had 2 years of being dead to make up for, and I have never in my life known when to stop, "You came back from the parley. You looked for a grave." His arm tightened. "There was no grave," he said hoarse. "I tore down half a wing looking for a grave that was never dug. She told me you were under the chapel stones. I sat by the wrong stones for a year." He looked down at me, and the locked iron thing his face had always been was simply gone, burned off, and underneath it was a man who had grieved the wrong thing for 2 years and had just been told he could stop. "I never threw you away, Eloan. I would have burned the kingdom to the waterline before I let anyone touch you. Someone made very sure I never got the chance." "I know," I said. "I worked that out at a river ford 11 days ago. It took me 2 years and your second in command, and a very long walk." Behind me, a small, furious voice that had been gathering itself said, "Is this him? Is this the king who would have loved us if the world was kind?" And I watched the most feared wolf alive turn to my daughter, who had her fists up still, and lower himself down into the mud in front of her a second time, blade and court and cousin forgotten, and say with enormous gravity, I am sorry I am late. The world was not kind. Your mother was. Everything you have she gave you, alone, and I am going to spend the rest of my life trying to be worth standing next to her." And he held out, on his open palm, the worn applewood wolf, and Bram, quiet, watchful Bram, reached out and closed his small father's hand around it for him, the way I had closed his small fingers around 100 things, and that was the moment. The whole courtyard, rank by rank, went down on its knees. The last to kneel was Sigrid, and she only knelt because Gunnar's hand put her there. What became of her is pack law and not my story, except that she was stripped of her name and her son's claim, and put out the eastern gate she was so fond of, in the snow, with no signet and no men, to learn the country she had sent me to. I am told she did not walk as far as I did. I find I do not lie awake over it. The king claimed us in his own hall the next morning, all 3 of us, in front of the court that had buried me, the Omega he had grieved, and the heirs an Omega had raised alone in the wood, and handed back asking for nothing. He set a crown aside that had been made for a different bride, and he did the unforgivable, lawless kingly thing of choosing the woman his wolf had chosen 3 years before in a winter garden, and he dared his court to say a word, and not one of them did, because there is no argument against a man kneeling. And he did a great deal of kneeling that year. I will not pretend the fallout was nothing. A king who sets aside a noble match for an Omega makes himself a question other packs ride a long way to ask, and we answered it, that first year, sometimes across a parley table and once across a battlefield, and the whisper that the Iron Heirs were woodborn and Omega got followed my children further than I would have liked. Power that bends does not bend for free, but it bent, and every season fewer people remembered to whisper because it is very hard to keep sneering at a lunar who can still set a snare and dress a wound, and who taught the crown prince to fish with his bare hands in the cold river, to the abject horror of his tutors. Here is the morning I would keep, if I could keep only one. A year on, in the warm of a spring I had not had to fear, I came in from the gardens to find the king of the Iron Territories sitting on the floor of our chambers, the floor, a man who had a throne, carving. Ada was supervising, because Ada supervises. And in his big, careful hands was a second wooden wolf, half finished, a mate to the worn old one, so that there would be two, one for each twin, a pair. He did not look up. I have had 2 years of grief to make up for, he said, and approximately no idea how to do it, so I am starting with the thing I know how to do with my hands. He turned the carving over. I made the first one for a woman I was not brave enough to claim. I am making this one for my children. It is the same skill. It turns out I have been bad at the same thing my whole life. You're not as cold as you think you are, I said. I had thought it in a winter garden 3 years before, and never once said it aloud. No, he agreed, and the dry thing his mouth does now, that the court never sees and I always do, came out at last. My wolf knew that before I did. My daughter is teaching me at speed. Sit down, you're blocking the light. Ada says the ears are wrong. A letter came that same spring, the only one I have ever kept besides the carving. It came from the Crossroads market under the fourth name I no longer needed, from the trader woman who'd bought my hides for 2 years and never asked my real one. A few clumsy lines hoping the woman with the 2 stubborn children had found somewhere warm at last. I keep it on the shelf beside the wolves. It is the only record left of the life I built in the cold, the one everyone calls so sad. And I take it down sometimes to remind myself that it was not sad. It was the proof. I raised 2 whole human beings out of nothing but stubbornness and applewood and love, alone, and when the world finally came looking, it found them laughing. I would do all of it again. I tell the children that, when they are old enough to ask why their mother flinches at an open gate in the snow, I tell them I would walk every cold mile twice. I do not tell them the other thing yet, that for 2 years I built their whole world on top of a lie a jealous woman told me at a gate, and that the only reason the lie did not cost us everything was that 2 small stubborn people refused to be anything but happy, and a buried name finally got tired of staying buried. So I'll leave you the question I still cannot answer, even now, even with him asleep across the room and a half-carved wolf on the floor between us. If I had not run, if I had gone to him the day he knelt in my dooryard instead of vanishing into the trees, would the truth have come out cleaner and sooner and without a blade across my arm? Or would Sigrid have simply found a quieter knife, on a darker night, with no court to witness it? I have told myself both stories. I cannot make either one lie down. Tell me which you believe. Tell me whether you would have stepped out of the tree line that day, or done exactly what I did, because every mother I have ever told this to swears she would have run to him, and I have never yet met one I believed. And if you want to know what the eastern dark sent to our gate the winter after, because a cousin put out in the snow with a grudge does not always die in it, and some debts come back wearing a familiar face, then comment the wolf, and stay close, and I will tell you who came knocking and what my daughter did about it, which is a story that frightens even me. They told the king I was dead, and they told me he had wanted me gone, and for 2 years we both believed the only person who profited. We do not any more. That, in the end, was the one thing she could not arrange.